Hey you, yes you, thanks for tuning in to the Healthy, Wild, and Free podcast. My name is David Benjamin. I'm your host and the founder of HealthyWildAndFree.com. If you're like me, you understand that health, the mind, body, spirit, heart connection, and living a green, eco-friendly, sustainable lifestyle are some of the most valuable and life-enhancing lessons that we can learn and pass on to our children to live happy and abundant lives. That's why this podcast was created, to help you grow in these areas. If you aren't already subscribed to the newsletter, go to healthywildandfree.com, click the box at the top right-hand corner to get a free copy of our latest ebook, and you will be subscribed to be notified about future podcasts. Thanks for subscribing and tuning in. Enjoy. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is David Benjamin, your host of the Healthy, Wild, and Free podcast. Today we have an awesome guest who is very interesting and has very interesting stories. I've met him a few times now. I actually met him in Detroit at the Awaken Empowered Expo, which is kind of a consciousness event, and he spoke about digestive health at the event, and I really liked what he had to share. He actually shared some information about different kind of cultures, historical cultures, and their kind of health practices from all around the world, so Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, and just the kind of different healers and cultures and different kind of tools and methodologies that they use within regards to healing and health and those types of things. So, but today we're going to talk about digestive health because that is his kind of specialty. So on the show today we have Dr. Matt Marturano. He's a naturopathic physician and creator of the Coherent method, which is a holistic approach to comprehensive digestive health. This method offers a framework for a personalized and focused approach to digestive health symptoms that combines lifestyle factors with specific food recommendations and dietary supplements in order to support the body's natural healing processes and help restore digestive health. He studied naturopathic medicine and is on the board of directors of the Michigan Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And you can learn more about his work at Dr. Matt, ND, that's N, the letter ND.com. And I'm going to bring him on the call right now. Dr. Matt, are you there?
Yes, I am.
How are you doing today?
Hi, David. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Glad to hear, and glad you can be on the show. I wanted to start the interview, kind of how I start all the interviews I do, and ask you the question, how did you initially kind of become interested in holistic and naturopathic health?
Sure. Well, growing up, actually, I was always under strong encouragement from my parents to, be a doctor, and I grew up and was very interested in science, mathematics, that sort of thing. And when I started college at the University of Michigan, I was pursuing a degree in biophysics, and eventually, the math part got a little bit too over my head, so I switched to biology and then added on a second degree, which was a philosophy. And that was really the beginning of when I started to learn a lot about just different ways of thinking that I'd really never been exposed to before. And I became very interested in the philosophy of science particularly. And so when it was time to think about what was next, I had considered more of a conventional medical school, but there was just certain pieces of the sort of the philosophy of health that I really couldn't get behind, and that's when I started looking and found about naturopathic medicine. I had no idea that I could go to a 4-year medical program where I would also learn about natural medicines, herbal medicine, and all that sort of thing. So when I learned that I could do it, I was off to the races.
Yeah.
That was it.
Do you think that's interesting? That's a kind of interesting story. Do you think that your biology and philosophy kind of pivot there within school kind of sparked your interest in seeing things differently as far as health is concerned?
Yeah, it really did, because what we most of us are, our view of science, our view of just the world around us is really based in a certain framework that's only been around for a few hundred years, which has a lot of value to it. But we're not often exposed to just other ways of looking at the world and viewing it, other philosophies, which different cultures throughout history, all the way from the ancient Egyptians, Indian culture, Romans and Greeks, there was all these different ways of looking at the world, and it was really interesting to kind of put on these different lenses and then look back at science, modern science, and say, all right, well, what do we have? What does this have to inform us by looking at it a different way? And so that was, one of the biggest things that for me was a shift in terms of looking at the body, was really starting to look at it from, what we would now call a more holistic approach, which is looking at it as a unit, as something that is more than just the sum of a bunch of different parts, and also taking into account non-physical aspects of health that include our emotions, our psychology, our spirituality, and how that all comes together to bear on our health.
Right. Very cool. So, how did kind of the digestive health? How did that what kind of made you decide to specialize in digestive health?
It's kind of interesting to me, even because when I first started naturopathic school, I think in our first year we had a couple classes where they kind of brought in the stages of the profession, people who have been at this for a really long time, and one common piece of wisdom that they all shared with us was, when all else fails, look to the gut. The digestive system is really the foundation of health in the body. And frankly, at that time, I really didn't find it all that interesting. I was much more interested in psychology. I was interested in mind-body medicine. I was interested in energetics and things like that. And it wasn't until I actually got out into practice, and also at the information which has been emerging since I started naturopathic school in terms of the relationship between our mind and the gut. But when I got out, into sort of the real world, I would say close to 90% of the people that were just coming in to see me, that were finding me, were having chronic digestive symptoms, and it really sort of, forced me to kind of take a really close look at this and say, what's going on here, and why are all these people not getting the help that they need. And then when I started to work with that in a little bit more detail, I had a couple really interesting experiences of people who had just immense sort of psychological and emotional shifts when we had some success in working with their gut. And that's what really sort of sparked a new fire for me in terms of, understanding this connection and how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you kind of saw how the gut does connect to psychology and to emotions and the rest of the body and the areas that were more interesting to you at the time. Very interesting. So what for someone that, is just kind of learning more about health and they're just kind of starting to dig into this type of information in a kind of alternative world, quote unquote, why is digestive health and the digestive system so important to, keep healthy and keep working properly? What kind of negative results come from not understanding the digestive system as far as health concerns go?
Well, I think that, pretty much all of us have this image that has sort of was birthed along with the Industrial Revolution, and this image of the body as sort of just a machine. And we have this idea that we sort of shovel fuel in. Food is fuel. We sort of shovel it in our mouths, and it goes into this mysterious place, and we get energy. And we don't really think about it much beyond that, but it's really a much more complex process. And so, for example, everyone knows that eating well is going to confer health benefits to us. But what we don't, sometimes people aren't aware of till it causes issues for them is that they might be eating well now, but their digestive system isn't working very well, and so they aren't able to get all of the nutrition from the food that they might otherwise, or they might be eating perfectly healthy food, but for some reason having an intolerance to, could be just about anything, and that's causing some issues for them. Or another example is a lot of people I've seen, who they go out and they pursue an alternative approach or natural medicine, and they sort of get a practitioner who just kind of throws the kitchen sink at them in terms of supplements. So they're taking all these supplements that theoretically should be working for them, but they're not. And so that's when we start to look at, what's just going in the mouth. Just because we swallow something doesn't necessarily mean it's getting into the body. It's having the effect that we want it to have. And so that's where, digestive health comes in. And then another angle of that's, I think, really fascinating has to do with the microbes that live inside of our gut. And we're learning so much about the microbiology of the gut and how these different organisms actually affect the way that we digest a food, affect the way that we use a nutrient, and which I think is really fascinating, can even impact us to the degree of affecting our, say, food cravings and things like that. That's an area that we're just really starting to investigate, but it looks very interesting, and I think might offer us an explanation for why, for example, sometimes when people, they really want to make a change to their diet, but they just find it really difficult to do, and a lot of times we sort of get hit with the message that it's just sheer will. If you have the will, if you have the intention, you're going to make that change. But what we have to consider now is that what we would normally think of as ourselves as a human, from a genetic level, or it's only about 10% of the genes that really affect us, our health, are actually human genes. The other 90% come from bacteria, and they have their say too. And a lot of times the ecosystem that's in our gut, just like anything else, becomes resistant to change. And even if it's in an unhealthy state, there's factors at play that make it hard or more difficult than we might think to make a change down there. So all of these things sort of come together. And I think a lot of times I've seen definitely a lot of stories of people who are just struggling for a very long time and not really getting that peace or that understanding that there's more that's going on inside the gut. It's oftentimes not as simple as just making a dietary change.
Mm-hmm. So basically, really utilizing the nutrition that you consume is kind of the role of the digestive system, so that you get the most benefit from that. And if you're eating healthy, to really fully kind of optimize that. And if you're not eating healthy, obviously a healthier gut and digestive system will at least use what it can, so that you can actually benefit from a somewhat healthy or less healthy diet. Beyond that, though, what negative kind of consequences and what kind of things become issues kind of either in the short term or long term when someone kind of neglects understanding digestive health, gut health, and these types of things?
Well, what happens, in the short term are usually just changes, that are confined to the digestive system. In other words, people have just your normal sort of everyday digestive complaints, from gas and bloating to just abdominal pain, difficulty with their stools, nausea, feeling really tired when they eat, reflux, all of these things that I think many of us have sort of been conditioned to just kind of accept as normal. And so what happens over the long term is that we a lot of times we have these symptoms, and we just sort of deal with them on a short-term basis. In other words, we're getting reflux, take a Tums, take a Zantac, take this, I feel better, get back to what I was doing. Over the long term, what can happen, though, is that these changes that are occurring in the gut can start to actually get into the body system as a whole. In other words, we can have a chronic inflammatory situation that's set up in the gut, and if that gets bad enough and chronic enough, that can affect the permeability of our gut tissue. And so these molecules and chemicals and things that might be causing us just discomfort in the beginning can start to gain access to the body at large. And we're learning that there's so many connections between chronic digestive issues and things that we previously thought weren't really connected, and particularly autoimmune disorders such as Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and also chronic inflammatory conditions. So it's something that if we let it go long enough, it starts to actually affect our body as a whole, and then it's no longer just contained to the digestive system. And then that's usually when people have decided that they've had enough. But unfortunately, letting it go that long, it makes it more of a challenge to get things back in working order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what I like about the work that you do. You help people be more in tune with their body and understanding what is causing the discomfort, what's causing the gas, the bloating, whatever it may be, and help to kind of fine-tune that, balance it, and align it so that their digestive system stays healthy and it doesn't affect their health negatively long-term. So I want to talk a bit about the Coherent method because this is something you developed, and I think it's just great for people to understand this and use it just to keep their digestive system healthy as a practice. So what is the Coherent method in a nutshell, and then we'll kind of dig into it from there.
Sure. Well, really what it is a framework for understanding digestive function, and Coherent is basically an acronym. Every letter represents a different aspect of our digestive function. Of course, we need all of them kind of working together. But the reason that I started work on it was because I just wasn't that satisfied with the framework that we've had in the past for working with functional digestive disorders. The one that I learned and is very, very, very popular and effective is called the 4 R's, where sort of repair, replace, reinoculate, and the 4th R slips my mind at the moment in terms of how we approach digestive function. But it was really incomplete from my perspective in terms of not addressing some things that are important, and in particular addressing the non-physical aspects of digestive health as well. And so it's sort of thing that came to me in a moment of inspiration, but also now as a framework for something that's in development, something that I'm working as I work with people, as I read more research and incorporate these things. Trying to bring together more of a coherent framework for how to approach digestive symptoms, because in the world of natural medicine, as I'm sure you're aware, we have sort of the opposite problem that we oftentimes encounter with conventional medicine, where someone might come in and they say, well, we can give you this medication, maybe this other one, we might be able to perform a procedure for you, and that's it. So there's only a few options for people. In the world of natural medicine, there's hundreds and hundreds of options, from anything from simple behavioral changes to dietary changes to supplements and all these sort of things, and it can very quickly become bewildering, not only for a patient but for practitioners as well, to try to sort through all of this morass of information and get something practical out of it. So the idea there is to take all of that and provide a framework to sort of funnel all of this information through and come up with very practical steps that are also, I think, understandable to people in terms of, okay, why am I doing this and what am I trying to accomplish?
Right. So it's definitely a great framework, and so let's just start with the Coherent method. What is the first colonized C? What does that kind of represent?
Well, C is for colonize, and that refers to our microbiota. So the microbiota are all of these microbes that are living in our gut. There are bacteria. There's also yeast, fungus. There's molds. There's parasites. There's viruses. They all live in there. And many of us just aren't aware of that to begin with. So our approach to a lot of things is not taking that into account. For example, a lot of people might have grown up and had chronic, say, sinus infections. They're taking antibiotics for that, say, maybe just once or twice a year growing up. And let's say they were in their teenage years, they might have had acne, and they were placed on a long-term prescription for antibiotics for that, or maybe someone ended up in the hospital. So there might have been a lot of reasons why we might have wanted to use antibiotics, but like anything else we take a pill and we put it in our mouth. So the first place that the antibiotic hits is our digestive tract. And typically what we use in most cases are broad spectrum antibiotics. So they're kind of like shotguns. They don't discriminate between what's helpful and what's not. They just go in there and kind of kill bacteria. So over time, these levels of bacteria can start to become lower and lower and set the stage for something that might be more problematic or more infectious to come in. So, the colonize is to simply remind us of, the fact that we do have these microbes in our gut, and we do need to think about how are we going to colonize them, how are we going to get these good bacteria in us, and how are we going to support their growth. And so that can, a first step for a lot of people is simply trying to incorporate more fermented or cultured foods into their diet that have these bacteria in them. Another thing might be considering, use of antibiotics and trying to limit them to when they are only absolutely necessary, or using some things that are more natural or some antimicrobials that might be more sparing of the gut flora, if that situation comes up. And then for some people, it also, for many people, in fact, involves taking a probiotic formula. And so then we have to look at, what kind of probiotic and what dosage do we want, and what kind of bacteria are going to be in this capsule. And there's, of course, different bacteria do different things. So all of these things kind of bear into this sort of notion of colonizing our gut, making sure that the ecosystem that lives in there is healthy and is alive, because the more that it is alive, the more that it's going to support our health in general.
Mm-hmm. And kind of colonizing the colony, quote unquote, or the colonies is definitely makes a lot of sense. What are some antimicrobial or natural antibiotic things that people can include in their diet that kind of help to balance out or kill the bad bacteria, viruses, parasites,
Sure.
and things like that?
Sure. Well, luckily, a lot of the herbs that are antimicrobial, people will be very familiar with, because they're a lot of our cooking herbs and spices. So over the millennia, even though we didn't really know about bacteria, until towards the end of the 19th century, what we did know was that if we had certain food products and we packed them in these herbs, they didn't go bad and people didn't get sick when they ate them. So, for example, simple